Psychologists, what's one thing a patient has told you that caught you off guard? My therapist once abruptly ended our session after telling me I needed to go to the ER. I had been in a car accident the day before and had an undiagnosed concussion that was pretty bad. I was so out of it, I didn't even realize I was out of it. He later told me I was talking about inappropriate topics. I was so embarrassed I didn't ask what I specifically talked about. I didn't want to know at that point, and wasn't making much sense. I'm just glad he recognized I was off that day and helped me get to the hospital. Next story. Told mine, I had seen him grabbing a drink at the same place I used to get drunk before COVID. He stared at me like I'd discovered something NASA was hiding. We had a laugh and he confessed it. Context, I had huge drinking problems and he told me he didn't like to drink at all. Next story. I paid and sat through an entire session of therapy during which my therapist ranted as to how great of a career he could have had as a stand-up comedian and how much he regrets his current profession. I kinda agreed with him near the end. Next story. I'm a clinical psychologist working on the back end of my postdoc. I work predominantly with acute adolescent presentations such as chronic self-injury or sexual trauma. I'm so used to the young people I help hating themselves. It hurts a lot inside, but I firmly believe in catharsis through positive regard and validation. So as we do our therapy, I often sprinkle in comments here and there about some of the things about them that I admire, respect, or appreciate. Things like their perseverance, their kindness, or their passion for an interest of theirs. I'm always so caught off guard when they agree with me or say something nice about themselves that it's really the only time I find myself slightly tearful in session. I'm always so damn proud of them, and it hurts to hear the depths of their self-hatred. Those little moments of growth make me feel like it's the first warm day after winter. Next story. I was in my second ever session, which coincidentally was right after my nan's funeral. I was talking about some stuff that had happened with my sister, who I already said was probably my biggest issue, and he asked, "Why is this person in your life? Why do you want to continue a relationship that hurts you so much? Do you actually want this relationship?" I was floored. It had never occurred to me that my sister didn't get a place in my life by default because family. I can't tell you how much this improved my life. Yeah, that's something that I think a lot of people need to hear that are feeling that pressure, that obligation. Make your own choices. Next story. Context. I work a lot from an existential perspective. At this time, I was working at a jail and talking to a guy who hitches rides on trains. We were talking about what he would have to do to change his life, not just get high and ride trains. He looked at me square in the eyes and told me he's freer than anyone else he comes across. He isn't indebted to a 40-plus hour work week, bills, or debts. He just hangs out with friends and travels state to state. He articulated how he knows he'll die young from missing a jump, but that ultimately he'll have lived and died as he wanted to. It was a conversation that really forced me to be cognizant of human freedom and choice. He wasn't disordered. He had chosen his own path and conclusion. The only thing he was doing wrong was breaking the status quo, the law. Frankly, who am I to judge or decide how to live a life? From then on, I was more careful to never tell a patient how to live or what to do. I'm only here to help someone think through their life and pick their desired direction. I've come to use a lot of sophist techniques to get patients to their own eureka moments. Next story. I'm really messed up. Been hospitalized a lot. I go through moments of such intense delusions that I'm no longer myself. I was admitted once after trying to get my veins out of my arm, thinking they were wires. The doctor that was assigned to me wasn't really expecting me to be so paranoid. While in the observation room, he was trying to talk to me and I blurted, "What's it like being a robot, Mr. Robot Man?" I said man, kind of like man, and he started laughing. He wasn't expecting it. I wasn't either. I laughed with him. He was such a nice East Indian man, and hearing anyone with the same accent makes me feel lighter somehow. Next story. I had one tell me I needed to learn to bite the bullet, which turned out to be good advice, even if it was blunt. Edit. I wasn't there because I was wanting to self-unalive or anything. I was there because my mom and I had a pretty volatile relationship. She had some emotional issues where she'd just lash out at me over things that didn't make sense. and if I needed to learn to stick it out until she got better, which she eventually did, and we have a much better relationship. Really paid off. Next story. I had a therapist tell me when I was a teenager that she didn't know what else to do to help me because it seemed like I already understood everything pretty well. This was after my overbearing and crazy helicopter mom dragged me in for being depressed. Then she switched to therapying my mom, and my mom quickly was in tears because she was the emotional strength of a child and wanted it to be about me when it was actually all about her. I knew exactly why I was depressed. I was stuck by myself in the middle of nowhere with her crazy butt. No personal space, no ability to get away, not being able to say no, her getting jealous of my friends when I spent time with them. It would make anyone depressed. She didn't even let me sit with a therapist by myself. Next story. I did most of my training in a pediatric hospital. One of my patients, a young adult with relapsing leukemia, cancer since young childhood, wanted to go to an outdoor festival with their significant other. The oncologists were adamant that due to the patient's low white blood count and current course of treatment, they couldn't let them go. Basically, if that person caught an infection, it would kill them. The patient was pissed, understandably so, and said something like, "I've had this disease since I was a child. I know I'm gonna die soon. I'm going to the concert, whether you like it or not, and if I die, then at least I'll do it on my own terms." It's always quite moving when a young person expresses their own mortality and confronts it head on. I had such admiration for that person. Yeah, I will say, as morbid and sad as this sounds, definitely proud of this young person for just owning the situation that they're in and saying, look, I'm not just going to rot away in a hospital. I'm going to do the things that I want to do. And, the short life that I've been gifted, I'm going to absolutely live it to the fullest. Next story. Patient here. In response to me telling my therapist that I was prescribed Wellbutrin for my depression and anxiety, my therapist stated that it was a medication that a lot of adults with ADD see a positive effect with. It threw me off for a second, and I was like, that's cool. Why do you say that? Therapist: because you have ADD. Me: what? I do? Yes, you present very typical ADD for adults. I thought you knew already. Nope, but that explains so much. I also got a second opinion just in case, and it turns out I absolutely am ADD. Thanks, Doc, LOL. Next story. Was talking to my school counselor about some mental health issues and told him that I like playing card games to take my mind off it. The man literally opens up his cabinet and pulls out a briefcase full of Yu-Gi-Oh cards. I'm a massive nerd. And says, "So, wanna play?" Don't get me wrong, but this guy had a lumberjack beard, was fit, and looked more like an athlete than a counselor, so I was shocked. Got over my problems and played every Wednesday against him. Yeah, so 13-year-old me definitely just nerded out as well at the prospect of pulling out a briefcase like he's Seto Kaiba or something. It's time to duel. Gotta love it. Sorry, I needed my moment. Next story. It's beautiful. I had a therapist tell me to make a F budget. Hear me out, LOL. He said you only have so many Fs to give before you blow. So just like with money, you need to budget it out. Start with the things you have to give a F about. Kids, work, health, and then cross the things off you dislike giving a F about, like people's opinion of what you wear, off the list, and don't give a F about that crap. This was an older gentleman who was cool for the most part, very well spoken, and didn't cuss. Hearing him say I needed to stop spreading my F so far made me die of laughter and immediately feel better. To this day, I still have an F budget that I do every month religiously, and it's taken so much stress off my shoulders. This is actually a great idea. Just focus on the things that you can control. More specifically, not just things that you have to give an F about, but things that you have control over. There's no sense in fussing over things that you can't will into existence, right? They're going to happen whether you want them to or not. That takes a whole lot of energy. Next story. My therapist and I would end every appointment with a discussion of the latest Game of Thrones while it was airing. A great way to end things. Even the crappy end of the show got plenty of lighthearted ribbing. It was great because it wasn't too personal, and after talking about SA for an hour, I could leave without being such a sad sack. Next story. First time I saw a counselor, he was looking over my paperwork and said he could tell from my handwriting that I was good in bed. I kid you not. I was so caught off guard, all I could say was, I think I am. So young and not assertive at all. Found out he got in trouble for an inappropriate relationship with a client. But it really screwed me up for a bit, him saying that, because I have problems setting boundaries with men. Next story. I'll never forget my first day of therapy. My therapist asked me if I had ever been abused as a child. I replied, no, I had a normal childhood. I had everything I needed. Food, shelter. My mother slapped me and would tell me to unalive myself, and my dad would drag me by the hair everywhere and pull my hair out, but no, nothing abusive or anything. There was at least 30 seconds of dead air between us as I watched her blink while trying to figure out how to respond to what I said. Eventually, she put down her file, crossed her legs, and said, "My dear, that is abuse." My world came crashing down all around me at that moment. For so many years, I'd buried my feelings about what they'd done so deeply that I managed to convince myself that what they'd done wasn't wrong. Less than a year later, I was diagnosed with PTSD and panic disorder from the trauma, and I cut off all communication with my parents. Next story. I was hospitalized a bit ago for trying to unalive myself. When you do that in certain places, they can put a mandatory hold on you. I was held for 8 days at a psychiatric unit. It was maybe the most helpful mental health assistance I've ever gotten. I had very insightful, intelligent doctors and counselors. At the end, on my last day as I was leaving, a nurse walked out of the secure portion of the facility and into a hallway. In the hallway, all my doctors and counselors had lined up to say goodbye on either side of the hall. As I walked down, my most favorite counselor started singing "Oh Holy Night" for some reason, and I don't know why, but I really loved it. Those doctors and counselors were so relatable and down to earth, and I felt so awful when I got there, and I was so much better when I left. Next story. So, as a practicing clinical psychologist, I've got to comment on the batcrap crazy unprofessional behavior being posted here. 1. If this happened to you, complain. I say fully recognizing that some may be left feeling disempowered to do so, which is horrible. If it's a licensed clinician, report it to their regulatory body. That's one of the reasons they exist, to address concerns of the public. If they are not, or even if they are licensed for that matter, but they work in a group practice, then speak to whoever has their name on the letterhead. Like the clinician whose business gets hit the most by lack of business related to this stuff. They may be quite thankful to know and can take steps to prevent this from happening again. 2. This can vary by region/country, so may not capture everywhere, but can be a useful starting point. The words counselor or therapist/psychotherapist are not necessarily reflective of any advanced training. Titles like psychologist, psychiatrist, or social worker are legally controlled titles, meaning they're issued and monitored by licensing bodies who ensure us people are qualified to do what we say we can do. Examine the hell out of us before they trust that we can, and act in the interest of the public to make sure that if we step out of line, we either get hauled back in with anything ranging from re-education to even perhaps getting kicked out of the club. In other words, the title comes with accountability. The former may not. Not saying that therapist Bob or counselor Kathy are inept, more about being aware of what you're investing in, and that one of the reasons our license behinds are in school so long was to become overly familiar with and invested in proper boundaries, ethics, and applicable laws. Bob and Kathy may not be as hip to that stuff. And 3, full acknowledgement. License title and being taught this stuff does not mean unequivocally that the clinician has the sense to use the knowledge. There's crap on the shoe of every profession, if we're being honest. That being said, think of the licensing process and education as the yard of the home where someone has been hired to clean up the doggy minefield, thereby substantially decreasing the chance of a nasty Nike. Much empathy and positive vibes towards those who've had negative interactions like those described in the thread. Beyond sucks, and I hope you feel like you can give a therapeutic relationship another try in the future if you haven't already. P.S. What caught me off guard? Light, a client who would randomly fart in sessions. Heavy, any medical event during a psychotic episode, or dysregulation into violent behavior. All very intense and sometimes where you just feel horrible for what the person is experiencing. I'd also say that no matter the fact that I've had to ask very directly hundreds of times, I'll never feel anything like I've been punched in the gut when someone endorses being in danger of taking their life. Such an evocative and somber moment. Next story. Not a psych, a patient. I was in hospital after having had a suspected miscarriage of a very much wanted child. The hospital knew about my mental health history, so they wouldn't release me without having spoken to a psychiatrist. It was Sunday morning, so the dude wasn't on site. So I'm lying in a hospital bed, and they bring in a phone, and the psych is on the other end. I say hello, and he says, "So I've heard you had a miscarriage." Me. "Well, that's what they think. It's not certain yet, but..." Psych says, "So are you going to unalive yourself if we send you home?" I was just like, what the F? No empathy, or how are you feeling about this, or do you have loved ones at home? Just let us know if you're unaliving yourself or not. I said, "I'm not sure. Probably not." Apparently that was good enough, and they sent me home an hour later. Good news though, it wasn't a miscarriage. I just had HCG levels that were low, but by no means abnormal for early pregnancy. My son is now 19 months old, and I decided not to unalive myself. Next story. I'm a MH worker. I was meeting with one guy for the first time. He was grandiose, which was always kind of fun in my opinion. While grandiose, people will sometimes claim extraordinary powers, great intelligence, strength, etc. He had been showing me how incredibly high he could jump. Not that high, and offering to display feats of strength if I could just give him some heavy stuff to lift. We were waiting for his treatment team to show up and maybe do a med adjustment. Then things changed. He told me he knew me, or about me. He started telling me things about myself professionally and some surface personal stuff a longtime client might know, but I just met this guy. At first he said he was psychic, but then laughed and said he just knew another client I was working with. Her relief. He said he knew her really, really well. I saw her at least once a week, had for a couple of years, and I'd never heard of him. Also, I knew her to be happily married. I initially shrugged it off, but he pulled out his phone and played a video with him and my other client giggling in bed. I tried not to look at it, but I couldn't completely avoid it. He was apparently her secret boyfriend on the side. Between the details about me from this guy I had only met 30 minutes before, and the revelations about my client's secret life I had no clue about, I was thrown. It was a weird hour. Next story. My psychologist, this was when I was 9, went up to my mother in front of 10 people and told her I was effed and there was nothing he could do, so she might as well kill me. He said this in front of me, my sister, my only friend, who then moved, my grandmother, my grandfather, and 6 strangers. I was, and still am, in therapy for watching my uncle die right in front of me. Heart attack, my wanting to self-unalive, depression, schizophrenia, and anxiety disorder. I think I'm fricked, not gonna lie. Next story. A psychologist I visited briefly to treat anxiety and depression began telling me really personal details about other clients in their sessions, and not vague stuff. More like he was hearing voices, and the voices said they wanted him to kill me, the psychologist, and that was extra scary because he's the owner of the local NFL team. Isn't that scary? Or she was addicted to cocaine and cheating on her husband, who's the owner of local mall chain. I grew increasingly uncomfortable with these personal anecdotes, and they began to take up larger and larger chunks of our sessions. By the end there, I would have to interrupt her to redirect her back to my issues. I was paying her to help me address them, after all. The last straw was when she left the office for over 15 minutes to go eat lunch, then charged me for a full session. I confronted her, saying I didn't want to hear these private and confidential stories anymore, and that I would prefer to stay focused on my issues during our sessions, as I was hoping she could teach me how to work through them. Crazy, right? She immediately raised her voice at me and tried to tell me I was imagining the whole thing, having some sort of delusion, an issue I've never been diagnosed with or struggled with. Then she backpedaled and tried to say that all those stories had been from her imagination, meant to benefit me. I pointed out the contradiction and expressed that I didn't want to spend large chunks of our sessions talking about people in her personal life, imaginary or otherwise. That's when she cracked up and told me that I wasn't worthy of someone with her talents, and could never hope to achieve mental health. I walked out and haven't been back to therapy since. Got into a supportive community, and they helped me heal, without gaslighting me or breaking confidentiality. Next story. My psychologist's jaw dropped to the floor when I explained why a good percentage of my body was always covered in scars or bandages. It was a mix of self-harm and from other miscellaneous things having caused a lot of harm to me. He ended up writing it all down and totaled to a 2-page list. The majority of it was things like broken ribs from having an aluminum canoe thrown at me when I was 4 and having been stabbed repeatedly with a Bowie knife. This caught him off guard because I apparently always seemed unnervingly calm to him and didn't outwardly show any signs of significant childhood injuries due to one of my hobbies being boxing. Next story. Super late, but hopefully someone gets to enjoy this story as much as I tried not to. I was working with the elderly in long-term care facilities, mostly nursing homes, but some fancier types. This happened at a nursing home. I had this great client. She was fully verbal and talkative, spunky, energetic. For a few sessions, I could not figure out why they had referred her to me. Eventually, it became clear. She was exceptionally delusional. She talked about how Bill Riley had left her $30,000 at the courthouse and how he talked to her and was interested in her story. She talked about how her evil daughter finally brought her to the home after the police told her she had to do something with my client because she was calling the police frequently reporting an intruder that was not there. The intruder was Eric, a medical doctor who could shrink himself down to the size of a penny and would hide in their vents, waiting for her to go to sleep so he could perform experiments. I rolled with it. Her reality is terrifying. No wonder she's distressed. One day I came to visit and she started with the usual, her room got moved to a park and Eric and his colleagues shrunk themselves down, and I was rolling with it. But then she told me that they went inside her vagina, had a picnic, and she's been picking out little animal bones and fur from her snatch all day. She was pissed they didn't clean up after themselves. I think maybe I had gotten so used to the stories that I was just sort of half paying attention. When I realized what she was talking about, wait, what? They threw a barbecue in your vagina? Yeah, I think it's the only time I had to literally bite my lips, cheeks, and tongue to try not to laugh. Not that this woman's condition is hilarious, but a barbecue in your vagina? I wasn't prepared. Or a few weeks later, she busted the windows in her room with her walker because she thought Bill O'Reilly was outside and the staff wouldn't let him in to see her. God, I miss that woman. She was truly great, and not because of the stories. Despite her delusions, she was sharp and witty, and generally just an awesome person to be around. R.I.P. Next story. I feel a sick sense of camaraderie seeing how many child psychologists effed up other Redditors. Jeez. I was 9 or 10. My father left us and my mother tried to self-unalive shortly after. In a session I spoke about being sad, my dad left us. Then I was asked, what did it feel like to know your mom tried to leave you forever? I'd never framed her self-unaliving attempt that way. I thought she was sick and needed to get better. That session really traumatized me and set me up for years of abandonment issues. Some people should not be allowed around children. Next story. I had a religious therapist once tell me I just needed more water to solve my depression. She concluded this by having me hold out my arms and she tested the strength of each one by pushing down on it and I had to resist against it. Like, really, looking back, I should have told her it was BS, but I was so caught off guard, I was just like, well, okay, I'll have some more water. Okay, I feel like there's like a bit missing here. What does having religious, pushing your arms down and saying drinking more water, how do all of these things connect? Someone else picked up on this comment down below, please. Next story. There's nothing I can do for you. Your problems are untreatable. I was 11. The honesty is now appreciated, but at the time it was so traumatic that I repressed the memory of hearing that and acted out so horribly that Toronto healthcare people have seen me as the enemy ever since then. Next story. Went to a psychologist when I was probably 13. I had depression, anxiety, and an eating disorder, and they often manifested in bad panic attacks and anger. After seeing him a few times and telling him everything, he brought my parents into the room and proceeded to tell them that I was fine. I was just angry at my parents and seeking attention. I tried protesting and explaining myself, but he refused to listen and tried arguing with me. Needless to say, I never went back there and my parents took me to a new psychologist. It definitely effed me up a lot, and even thinking about it makes me angry. Next story. The only thing that caught me off guard was when my client, after 3 weeks of acting more aloof than anyone I've ever met, admitted that he was only in therapy to get his mom off his back for having a hard time getting to sleep, which she thought meant severe anxiety. I spent the time between speaking to my supervisor on how to touch on possible severe trauma. I felt like an idiot, but he kept coming back, so I imagine I was useful in some way. Next story. While I was working at an inpatient facility, I was helping de-escalate a patient who I had a good rapport with. We were sitting in a hallway speaking, and he was telling me about the last time he had become that upset. He said, "Last time I was that angry, I stabbed an orderly." Then he looks at me and said, "Don't worry, Mrs. A-hole, I would never stab you." It definitely threw me off, and was probably the most touching thing I've ever heard from a patient. Next story. I was taking my teenage daughter, who was struggling with an eating disorder, to a therapist who specialized in that. Even though she was old enough to drive herself, I always took her and waited in the waiting room, just to be supportive for her. To be honest, I didn't think the sessions were helping all that much, but I was at my wit's end trying to help my girl. I knew enough was enough, though, when after missing a few sessions due to other commitments, my daughter showed up to her appointment and the therapist greeted her with, "Wow, you look like you've lost some weight," in an approving tone. What the hell? We never went back. Next story. My mom was a psychiatric nurse, basically a psychiatrist who can't prescribe medication. So she never tells me details really, even being retired, but she had a patient who told her he liked her jacket. One day, she comes home on a hot day and then a few days later is asking if we saw her jacket. She thought she had left it at work but couldn't find it. No big whoop. It wasn't a fur coat or anything expensive. A few weeks later, she's seeing the patient, and right when the patient sits down, he goes, "Oh, I ended up coming back when our session left and your door was unlocked, so I took your jacket." Not the most exciting story, but he did get transferred to a new nurse after that. My mom tells the story better. Next story. I was making some lighthearted comments after the appointment with my psychologist about how people in my little town don't believe in the coronavirus. And he said, "Well, I think China spread it on purpose, so I may be a little crazy too." Edit. He didn't say China was negligent and allowed it to spread, which I think most people don't think is too far-fetched. He said they did it on purpose, like engineered it and caused the spread purposefully. Next story. I've never been to therapy per se, but when I was in 3rd grade, I had a traumatic experience before school one day. I won't get into details. And that day at school, I remember drawing an eerily dark picture. It was a pencil-shaded picture that showed a figure dangling from a tree. The figure was meant to be me. After drawing it, I folded it in half, ripped it into 4 pieces, and threw it in my classroom trash can. I guess I went to the bathroom because shortly after, the teacher had the drawing pieced together on her desk with tape. Somehow, she got it to the school guidance counselor, who proceeded to call me to her office. The next thing I remember is looking out the window in her office for about an hour answering questions. "Is everything okay at home?" "Fine." "Do you want to hurt yourself or others?" "No." "Would you like to call your parents?" "No." She would hold up some black ink symmetrical pictures and ask what I saw. A butterfly, a cloud, a tree, a sword. "Do you want to spend the rest of the day here to finish your work?" "Sure." She calls my parents while I'm in the next room with the door open. "I think he's just a little tired. Probably stayed up late last night." My parents ignored this and dismissed it just like the guidance counselor. That same afternoon, I got off the bus and ran away. I was gone for about 4 hours. No one ever asked if I was okay or if I wanted to talk about it after that day. I don't know. I guess I felt abandoned after that, and looking back, I'm shocked at how little people cared. I've since tried unaliving myself 9 times. Next story. Not a psychologist, but a patient. I went to a recommended psychiatrist after a week-long blackout period where I remembered absolutely nothing. I was drunk for the first 2 days, but then my brain was like, F it, and blacked out the next 5. It was so bad I apparently punched my best friend in the face, tried to jump in front of a train, and literally couldn't recognize myself in a mirror. Very shocking to see yourself through someone else's eyes, let me tell you. This dude, this licensed practicing psychiatrist, recommended to me by my family doctor of 10 years, started the meeting by saying, "I don't believe in mental illness, it's simply a weakness of the mind," and then spent our 1.5-hour appointment talking to me about how he would never step foot in a hospital because he doesn't trust the government to not, quote, take and replicate his superior DNA, and other shocking conspiracy theories. I literally spoke for maybe 6 minutes total, and he consistently asked me, unkindly, if I've ever been SA'd, and if so, what it had been like. I had, and it had been traumatic, and also triggered a blackout period. He then ended the session with, "You definitely have DID," and sent me on my way. Not only is DID very hard to diagnose, he had only spoken to me for a grand total of under 10 minutes, and spoke at me for 1 hour and 20. I do not have DID, lol. I'm bipolar and have a neurological issue in which I have like 5 times the amount of cortex in my brain than people are meant to. I'm actually a case study. But yeah, that dude, insane. Next story. Patient's perspective. When I open up about my trauma to them, I've had multiple therapists, and they get tears in their eyes and are speechless, which makes me just sit there like, I don't think that it's bad, questioning whether it was really that bad and shocking. It's also strange to see them get teary, but I think it helps me feel a connection. My sister got told by a therapist as a child that she was just stubborn and that was the reason for acting out. Not the fact that we were being SA'd for years and no one dug deeper into why she was acting that way. But a nice thing that caught me off guard is my most recent therapist coming with me to try and get me moved out of the house I'm in due to emotional abuse, and she technically wasn't allowed to do that and went against her job rules. However, I had major anxiety and she helped so much, even if I'm still stuck in this hellhole. She risked her job for me. Next story. I had a psychologist that I was only occasionally seeing at the start of my mental health decline. Not his doing, but the help I needed then was more than the once-a-week meetings could fix. He had such patience with me and my fear of never getting over my anxiety and depression. He looked at me on our 3rd session and told me straightforward, what if you don't get better? What if you have this all your life? Why not try to work with it and learn to manage rather than fight it? And that really was a pivotal moment on self-acceptance for what's going on with me. That this isn't going to go away like I want it to. It caught me by surprise because I was so angry at myself for being depressed. I didn't think to just accept it. I've been through different programs, doctors, and hospitals since, but his words really stuck with me. Next story. I took a client, boy, age 8, to Community Park and went over the rules of the park. Obviously rules of no running, identified, but then they added no pushing, especially girls' heads over and over until they're flat dead. We left the park to discuss a few things along the lake instead. Next story. Patient here. I went to a psychologist for a little while for my anxiety, and it was clear he wasn't right for me. Much, much older than I was. Never let me speak, always change topics, etc. So I was planning on finding a different person to talk to. But the kicker was when I was talking about my mother and started crying. To preface, he was big on rationality and staying rational, which is an understandable thing if you're trying to help with anxiety, but he did it in all the wrong ways. I started crying, and this grown-butt man looked at me and said something I'll never forget with utmost seriousness. Don't cry. Crying is an irrational response. Went through the rest of the session feeling like crap and never went back. Next story. My best friend has had a hard childhood, and about 6 years ago, she was going through some deep, deep trauma with her therapist, and was sobbing and shaking as she spoke. As she took a little break, he cleared his throat and said, if I can speak freely, with all due respect, with everything that's happened in your life, you should be way more effed up. She said she burst into laughter and said, thank you. Next story. I was the patient in this situation. She called my parents to have a small chat with them. Nothing harmless, really, just to get to know them because of my complaints. And both my parents were there. Next time I saw her, she casually said, you have your father's humor. And I replied something along the lines of, thanks, it's the trauma. And she laughed. She laughed. She found it actually funny and didn't shame me. It's not really interesting, but I have anxiety and thought she'd shame me for my coping mechanism. Such a sweet lady. Next story. Went to a therapist when I was a teenager. Tried explaining to her that I had issues with my pride and asking for help. How I couldn't show emotion around people because I felt that that was weakness and I couldn't be weak in front of anyone. She told me that I should just get over myself because my problems are not that bad. She went on to explain how hard her divorce with her ex-husband was and how she overcame it because she was so strong. Afterwards, my mom asked me about my session and I begged her not to schedule another appointment with a therapist. Completely turned me off to the whole therapy thing. Next story. Patient here. In my early 20s, my dad paid for me to go to a psychologist because I was having horrible night terrors. It got so bad that I was drinking heavily and staying out until the sun came up because I was terrified of falling asleep without someone being awake. This lady apparently was also very much a devout Catholic. About 4 weeks in, she referred me to a priest who apparently did exorcisms. That was the last time I ever saw her. I can't remember where the guy was. I know he was based at a church in the Coconut Grove area of Miami. The church had a high school attached. La Salle, something like that. This was about 10 years ago. Apparently, every city needed to have a priest that could perform exorcisms, and that's where Miami was. The terror stopped as soon as I moved out of my dad's house. Next story. I think I talked my psychologist into moving away. When I was 19, I had to see a psychologist because of depression, stress, self-unaliving thoughts, and so on. Since most of my problems were related to family drama, we reached the conclusion that maybe it would be a good thing for me to move away. We talked about it constantly, and I told him I have a friend in Switzerland and wanted to visit for a week, and if this is okay with the therapy going on. I went there 5 days a week at that point, and I needed every single one. He said that this was a good idea and gave me his number in case I need to talk about something. The week after I came back, we talked about my trip, what we were doing, and what I liked and disliked the most. I had nothing negative to say. I wasn't so near being happy since I was 16, so it seemed to be an interesting enough subject to talk about for multiple days. Shortly after, I went a second time to Switzerland, visiting my friend, and with the same result after I returned. When I turned 20, my psychologist gave me a book about the most beautiful places of Switzerland, and said that he also will go there for holiday thanks to my memories on how great it was. This did go on for a couple of months until I was down to only one visit per week, and the resolution that I want to move. And also being in a state of mind where I actually could move. I knew that my psychologist had a new job at a different clinic, but I didn't know exactly where. When our last session arrived, he handed me the Swiss starter pack with all kinds of gizmos and books about the country, and told me that he liked it there so much that he'll move there in 2 weeks, and that's thanks to my stories because otherwise he would never have went there for the holidays. So yeah, that was an interesting situation for me, because on one hand, I was really happy that I was able to excite someone to do this, but on the other hand, I was like, well crap, I talk about it for almost 2 years and he's just doing it. Today, we live not far from each other in Switzerland, and we meet at least once a year, not for therapy, but for coffee this time. It's always nice to hear stories about the therapist getting some sort of sense of fulfillment or knowledge from the patient. So yeah, a little mutual growth there. Like to hear it. Next story. My wife is an LPC. She works with severely mentally ill patients, most with dual diagnosis. These are people that will most likely never get better or be productive members of society. I feel like she's an awesome and strong therapist. Many professionals in the field have told me the same. Working with these types of people can have moments that would catch many people off guard, but she's a hoss. She asked one of her patients why he didn't want to eat lunch with the other peers. It's how they refer to patients because it's more humanizing. She said this was one of the craziest patients she's ever had, and that he doesn't live in this reality of 23.5 hours every day. In a moment of clarity, he told her his reason for not wanting to eat with his peers. I don't know if you know this, but those people in there are crazy. She said it was the one time she's ever inappropriately laughed in her professional career. Next story. Patient here. I'm bipolar. My therapist was very aware that's what I was working through, and we'd been working together for a few weeks. Normally I'd cry a lot, but I was talking about something frustrating and got a bit worked up. You probably don't trust my perspective, but I wasn't screaming or freaking out. My body language was probably aggressive and I wasn't exactly quiet, but it's not like I was having an episode or something. She got incredibly aggressive and frustrated and asked me to leave. I didn't understand what happens and cried in my car. Next session, we talked about it and she told me it was because of her own experiences with men, especially men getting angry, and told me I might need to find another therapist if I was going to get angry in sessions. I thought it was a safe place. I genuinely wasn't that angry, and none of it was directed at her. You'd think if you can't handle a man getting angry in a session, maybe you wouldn't take on a bipolar male working through a bunch of crap. At the end of the day, I don't think I really realized just how much I was freaking people out, and scaring my therapist was a bit of a wake-up call. Next story. I got two as the patient, both about marriage counseling and relationship stereotypes. A little bit of background on us. My wife and I are a typical modern couple. We share the roles and chores. So she isn't the one always cooking and cleaning, and I'm not always mowing the lawn or managing finances. We do it all together. Now on with the stories. My wife and I had some major life changes early in our relationship, and it really affected our marriage. We found a really good therapist that specializes in marriage counseling. On the first day, it was obvious that she was used to the old-style traditional couples. When we had to correct her that my wife wasn't a stay-at-home wife, or that I cooked half the time, she froze, like a good 3 or 4 seconds. Just a blank look as she processed the information. Eventually, she caught on, but it was a very awkward first session. She did end up helping us work through our issues, and my wife and I bonded on our enjoyment at watching her reactions while trying to figure us out like a puzzle, so I'd say it was worth it. The second one was really bad. My wife is Catholic, and the church where we were getting married required a weekend couples retreat. Standard stuff to make sure everyone was on the same page before tying the knot. If you want kids, how many? If yes, shared finances, family, medical histories, etc. Eventually, they had a guest speaker come up and talk about what it means to be a husband and wife. One problem, this guy was super sexist. Like, makes everyone in the room uncomfortable sort of way. He started talking about how a wife's role is to support her husband and be quiet and obedient. He tried to make a joke about how a wife must always look her best. If she gets fat and doesn't wear makeup, then her husband won't want her anymore and will sleep with other women. This didn't happen decades ago. This happened less than 5 years ago. Next story. My therapist told me to just do things and continues to. She doesn't tell me anything to do to help me cope with my anxiety and doesn't help me try and find a way to get motivation and work through my depression. She doesn't tell me how to work through being very adverse to change in any other parts of my autism. She just tells me to stop thinking and feeling that way and just do things. She keeps saying she wants to help me and then does nothing to help me. I don't know if this is really what OP was asking for, but I'm just so done with my therapist. Next story. I had a psychologist lean in sort of conspiratorially and ask if I was a spiritual person. I replied yes, and she proceeded to tell me that upon hearing the traumas I'd been through, she wanted me to know that I was probably from a cursed bloodline and that I could talk to people from her church about it if I wanted to find out more about it. I hope he left. I'll just leave it at that. My goodness, what in the world? Next story. I effing hate my psychiatrist. I always pray I get the nurse practitioner. My psychiatrist told me she wouldn't diagnose an eating disorder until my period stopped, even though I confessed to binging and purging 8+ times a day and was 89 pounds. I never got treatment for it. Pulled myself up from there. She also put me on a med, Zoloft, and continue to raise the dosage each appointment despite me telling her it makes me more depressed and anxious each time. The last 2 to 3 months before I was taken off the med, I was on the max dose for a minor and passing out from hyperventilating and a panic attack at least 6 times a day, and school was basically impossible. There were never any reasons for them either. They just happened, and I had no control of them or my body when it happened. The nurse practitioner was like, "What the F?" and immediately decided I needed to go inpatient and be cross-tapered off of Zoloft and on to Effexor. I was pissed because I had to go to inpatient for something completely out of my control. The cross-taper went super smooth, though, and over a year and a half later, I'm on the same dosage in med, with fewer issues with PTSD and GAD, but still depressed as F. My mom talks to my therapist before I actually have my appointments with her, and once in particular, I got really effing upset. My mom will go absolutely psycho when it comes to chores. My siblings and I have an organized system, but every few weeks or months, she'll lose her mind if a few chores don't get done and scream. Take all electronics, scream more, accuse us of gaslighting, insulting and screaming, talking about us to other people very loudly in hearing range, mutter under her breath all the effing time, for several days before just kind of going back to normal. Anyway, she was pissed and complained to my therapist about us never doing chores, and despite me explaining to my therapist for months that each one of my mother's episodes trigger me severely because I really do all I can and am very consistent with my chores, but feel like it's never good enough and that I'll never be good enough, she started telling me I should really be kinder to my mother and do my chores. I almost effing lost it then because I rarely ever lose my temper with my parents. Once or twice a year, and it's always when she's in her screaming episodes. And I do. My effing chores. But my mother loves to paint all 4 kids with the same brush. I've seen actual social workers and therapists do a holy crap when they start reading through my papers for the first time. I was severely abused by many people over a long period of time, and suffer from severe mental issues from that, but always just look like an ordinary teen the size of a 10-year-old and the manners of an adult. I think that's all for now. Next story. I was depressed as all hell my first semester of college and told my therapist about wanting to injure myself or half-butt a self-unaliving attempt so people would take me seriously when I told them I was caving under pressure. Described the all-nighters, 70-plus hours of studio work, cutthroat competition, pressure to perform, vindictive professors. Lamented that this was the thing to do after high school, and I had to stay on track. She told me I could leave. That had never occurred to me. I packed some essentials and drove home that night. I checked into a mental health facility just past midnight. Bonus: my roommates actually almost filed a missing persons report before they could get a hold of my parents. I think as I was leaving, I had said, I'm going to be gone for a while. I don't know when I'll be back, if I'll be back. Next story. Almost exactly a year ago now, I was in a mental hospital. I'd heard lots of bad things about it, but all the nearby hospitals were full, so I either had to go there or wait in an ER room for a few days doing nothing. Well, I was sitting in this weird empty room with the psychiatrist who would be treating me, and I only got to wear scrubs since they'd taken my clothes. The problem is I was harming very badly at the time and hated having my injuries on display. Out of nowhere, this man says, "Give me your arm," and I looked at him confused. So he said with more authority, "Give me your arm." He held out his hand, so I did what he asked and reached out my arm. He took my wrist, turned my arm around to display my scars, and smacked my forearm with his hand. "Bad. No more," he scolded. I stared at him in complete disbelief and actually started laughing because WTF. Surprisingly, he wasn't such a bad doctor during my stay, but that really took me off guard. LOL. Next story. As a psychologist in a prison many times, you can read past comments. One that always sticks out was a patient I really liked who always talked about her ex-husband in favorable terms. One day, out of the blue, she told me that she burned him on the leg with an iron many times and then would send photos to his family. She thought they were being mean to her. I was so surprised. She then outlined a lot of deep, dark thoughts she never disclosed before. Next story. From a patient's perspective, I had explained to my psychologist how I felt really bad about not wanting to go out on another date with this guy. Felt really bad, guilty, everything. He looked at me and said, "Well, why don't you effing marry him?" I just sat open-eyed and then laughed and said, "Wow, you're right," and never thought about that again. So now, whenever I feel bad about something inconsequential or little, I think back to his words. My psychologist was amazing, though, and I always valued his bluntness, and that was usually the best way to get through to me. You know, bluntness, truth bombs, they might not work for everybody, but in my opinion, this is definitely the most effective way to give people the right perspective. Next story. Patient here. I see a psychologist and a care coordinator, a therapist who can refer you to more specialized people, such as dietitians, but is your main point of call for anorexia nervosa and borderline personality disorder. My psychologist laughed at me while saying, "You're not crazy, are you?" when I was expressing my concerns for patterns of delusional thinking. That was 4 years ago, and I switched to a different psych who later left for better placement, but returned back to the OG psychologist because she's the only one who's in the service currently. Last month, I was told I was given a referral to an eating disorder service for the ED that she diagnosed me with, and in the same phone call, she told me that I wouldn't look any different if I lose 5 kg. There's been more disagreeable things she's told me, or my GP, in letters that I get sent a copy of, but those are the ones that have really stuck with me. Next story. I was sent in for an evaluation once when the psychologist abruptly told me to lay down on a couch while she called 911. I'd been texting someone and told them I was afraid I might die soon, and if I didn't respond, call 911. They did anyway, thinking I was wanting to self-unalive. I'll be honest in saying I was pretty close. The issue wasn't some psychological issue. I just had open heart surgery, and the scarring caused a serious case of SVT, supraventricular tachycardia. My pulse would either double or triple in a single heartbeat without warning for hours at a time. When I got to this little office at 2 a.m., she asked if I'd been thinking of hurting myself. I was honest and said yes, because I'd been in SVT anywhere from 8 to 20 hours a day over 2 months. couldn't sleep, couldn't cook or prepare food, couldn't drive, shower, or lay down flat. I was sleep deprived, constantly on the verge of passing out, and my chest hurt constantly, up into my throat even. I literally felt like I was dying, and I was turned away from the ER prior because it, quote, wasn't a life-threatening condition, and they believed I was medicine-seeking. I have a long medical history, even without the cardiac stuff. 5 minutes into this evaluation, I was explaining all this and casually mentioned that my pulse has just doubled and was well over 180 BPM. I told her the one and only reason I'd ever unalive myself is to escape from this non-stop torture that it felt like would drive me to an early death anyway. Her eyes bugged out as she took my pulse. Then she ordered me to lay on the couch while she called an ambulance.